You know, the idea that, well, you shouldn't take marijuana because it makes you feel good is absurd.
It's kind of treating citizens like babies that can't make their own decisions.
And they're classifying it up there with cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines, ecstasy. Are you kidding me?
Cannabis, as we know, in the last 5,000 years has caused 0 deaths.
The evidence about the medicinal applications of cannabis is overwhelming.
Oh, many pot smokers in the closet, in the open, kind of in the grey area, on the fence, and they're everywhere.
Why can't people smoke a joint and then go and relax? But they can go into a pub and get drunk and then have a fight with your best mates and stuff like that, you know? It doesn't make any sense, really.
But I think there is a lack of understanding and a lack of empathy probably among some drug users, that is the alcohol drinkers, against people who are other drug users, that is, for example, cannabis smokers.
If you're a smart person, you know that spending billions of dollars trying to prevent people taking drugs has not worked for 40 years, is not going to work for the next 40 years, so we need a new solution.
Vote for a political party that's actually got some sort of practical, evidence-based solutions.
I think the idea that people take too many drugs and have problems is true, but the way to deal with that is not prohibition, is not fines, it's not locking people up, it's social services. That's what we need in this country for a whole heap of problems.
Paper, animal food, building, human food, clothing, medicine, rope, sails, fuel. Reefer Madness was a propaganda campaign that came to Australia from the United States in the late 1930s. There were 3 major players: media baron William Randolph Hearst, the Commissioner for the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, Harry J. Anslinger, Canadian magistrate and author Emily Murphy. The campaign was fueled by fear, greed and racism.
Marijuana makes fiends of boys in 30 days. Hashish goads users to bloodlust. By the tons it's coming into this country, the deadly, dreadful poison that racks and tears, not only at the body, but at the very heart. Users of marijuana become stimulated as they inhale the drug, and are likely to do anything. Most crimes of violence in this section, especially in country districts, are laid to users of that drug. You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war.
Addicts to this drug, while under the influence, are immune to pain and could be severely injured without having any realisation to their condition. While in this condition, they become raving maniacs and are liable to kill or indulge in any form of violence to other persons.
There are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the US, and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz and swing result from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. The primary reason to outlaw marijuana is its effect on the degenerate races.
Newspaperman Randolph Hearst was heavily invested in timber plantations. Hemp was his chief competitor. Anslinger had family connections to DuPont Chemical, who had just patented nylon. Hemp was their main competitor, and, curiously, DuPont Chemical financed the movie Reefer Madness.
It is only through enlightenment that this scourge can be wiped out. These drugs, opium, morphine, and heroin. And more vicious, more deadly, even than these soul-destroying drugs, is the menace of marijuana.
The Reefer Madness campaign changed the name of cannabis and hemp to marijuana, which they touted as the new menace.
In 1935, DuPont was born.
Alcohol prohibition wasn't long gone. The DEA were out of work, Hearst was in control. Corruption and conspiracies, the wheels began to roll. In World War II, hemp was grown by the ton. When the war was over, another had begun. They changed the law in Congress, media was aligned. Power, greed, and crime all lurking behind. DuPont trees to paper and now look to close. The hemp crops disappeared, no one knows. Harry J. Slinger, he got his way. Reefer Madness, the order of the day. Hemp kept navies sailing the high seas. Made clothes, paper, medicine, and seed. The savings of humanity prohibited by law. Number one target in the now corrupt drug war. Legalize, regulate, tax it. The law is wrong, it's time to act it. Legislation is the only way. Get up, stand up, have to say. Legalize, regulate.
I've been doing this for a long time.
You've been on the front line.
I think
for
so.
many years.
Yes.
And so what have you learned from that experience?
We have known since 1974 that marijuana kills cancer cells. And yet people are that's just becoming a revelation now. We've known since 1947 that marijuana is very effective at dealing with seizure disorder. And yet that's big news in 2014 that, my goodness, cannabis is useful in treating seizures. I think the media has also been complicit in this and has basically highlighted the recreational aspects, and when they do that, it's the more outrageous recreational users.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to why this is a stepping stone, which by the way has been thoroughly debunked.
So this is the gateway drug.
The gateway drug. And actually cannabis is an exit drug. A lot of people with PTSD, the returning military or people that have been in natural disasters or been raped or abused, have found that cannabis is actually more effective with far fewer side effects than the prescription medication. I mean, people tell me about prescription medication that has been prescribed for their PTSD that they feel like a zombie.
Yes.
And with cannabis, they feel like themselves. You know, they're just normal.
So what we're doing is we're criminalizing ill health in a way.
Exactly, yes. We're criminalizing ill health, and we're making it very difficult for researchers and physicians to use this in a manner in which it's been used for almost 5,000 years. I mean, the first pharmacopoeia by oral history in China was said to have been written in 2637 BC, and it contained cannabis. So that's at least how far back it goes, and since they wrote about it then, they probably knew about it a little bit before that. But everybody who uses cannabis, it makes them calmer, helps relieve their anxiety, helps them sleep, helps them enjoy life more, improves their quality of life. So, I think that Dennis Perron once said that all use is medical, and at one time I thought he was sort of over the top on that. But the longer that I've been around it, the more I recognize that there is medical value. I've seen people who are extremely ill, people who have neurodegenerative diseases, people who have multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's. I had one gentleman with Parkinson's who was a painter, an artistic painter, and he gave me a picture and he said, "I'm giving you this, Dr. Bierman, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't still be painting." And of course it wasn't me, it's the plant. And people say we have a lot of courage. And I say all I've done is read the literature, all I've done is kept an open mind. Yeah. In the States, we can advertise prescription drugs on the television, and there's this long laundry list of side effects that they read off, and they say, and may cause death. And cannabis is one of the safest therapeutic agents known to man, and that is a quote of the Drug Enforcement Administration's chief administrative law judge in 1988, who recommended rescheduling cannabis to Schedule II so that doctors could actually prescribe it with specific dosages and specific content of THC and CBD.
The very first thing that should have happened 10 years ago, if not earlier, is the legalisation of medicinal cannabis, that is, cannabis for medicinal uses, whether you're a user because you're suffering from some kind of illness or condition, whether you're the person supplying that person who's the patient. That is clearly, for me, in an absolute separate category, absolutely crystal clear that should be a legal activity. The evidence about the medicinal applications of cannabis is overwhelming. Doesn't mean it's going to cure every condition for every person. That's not the idea. It's some level of treatment that some people should be able to choose. And it comes down to that individual person's right, in my view. If you want to choose this particular treatment for your particular condition, that's absolutely your right. It is a medicinal issue and it should be seen completely separate from other uses of cannabis.
So there is enough research and evidence, because the government's very big on having evidence-based research to make their policies on. So is there enough research now to prove medical cannabis?
The evidence has been complete and convincing and unnecessary to go further, really, for about 15 years.
I mean, the idea of taking a medical condition, substance abuse, and criminalizing it is absurd. Imagine throwing people in prison for having cancer. Well, why should we throw people in prison for having the disease of substance abuse?
In rough terms, the number of people who smoke cannabis every year in Australia is getting close to the number of people who smoke cigarettes in Australia. The number of people who smoke cigarettes is declining. The number of people smoking cannabis goes up and down a little bit.
The rate, the number of people each year is between 2 and 2.5 million in Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, at a rational level, when you think about it, you think about the evidence, you think about the proof. Is this system working? What are the objectives of the system to stop people using drugs? Well, is it working? Well, no.
But the difference between the cannabis smokers and the cigarette smokers is most people who smoke cigarettes smoke every day of the year and smoke quite a lot of cigarettes, 15 to 20 cigarettes. Very few smoke just a few cigarettes now and then. There are some, or very few people smoke 60 cigarettes a day. So people are bunched around the middle. With cannabis, it's quite different. A small number of people smoke every day. Most people who smoke cannabis smoke once a week, once a month, once in 2 months, or even less frequently.
So we want to be able to educate children about, drug usage and the risks and health risks around that, and we want to give them time to mature and make that decision.
Well, like we do with alcohol and tobacco, we don't allow minors to. It's illegal to sell to minors. It's illegal to give it to minors. So we could apply the same set of laws to marijuana.
We talk about treating drugs the same as we treat the other drug, alcohol and tobacco, and people say, oh, but those are really bad. I said, well, yes, that's why we strictly regulate them and control where they're sold and who they're sold to, and we control how much is bought by the tax price.
So we have 80,000 people being arrested just for drug consumer offences in Australia each year, and of them 65% are arrested for a cannabis possession offence. So we're talking about 60,000 people arrested just for the possession of a small quantity of cannabis. So I don't think anyone could provide any evidence to show that that's a really effective way of using police time or spending tax revenue. But it's not just the cost, it's two things. One is that it essentially diverts police away from other kinds of policing activities that would be much more useful, for example, cracking down on domestic violence. But the other thing is that some of these policies actually increase the harm of illicit drug use, and we've really seen that with the Drug Detection Dog program, which has essentially been a way of encouraging music festival attendees to use more dangerous drugs than cannabis because those drugs are less detectable.
But the way the police enforce the law, the way the police, for example, have got sniffer dogs, as many people will be aware. Where do they take those sniffer dogs? They don't take them to the fancy hotels in the eastern suburbs where there might be a bit of cocaine being used and so on among the professional and the very rich people in the Sydney situation. They go to places like Redfern Railway Station. They go to places like music festivals. They go to places where they know that they will catch a largish number of people.
And easy targets?
Easy targets.
People that don't know their rights or have the
economy. Fish in a barrel.
If we want to make young people safe, they need information. And they need realistic information. At the moment, the drug information they get says that cannabis is just as dangerous as methamphetamines, it's just as dangerous as the most potent form of ice. There's no differentiation. It's all drugs are bad. And so if young people are told all drugs are equally bad, well, how can they make an informed choice about what's likely to cause addiction, what might cause harm, what might, destroy their relationships? They can't.
Do you want your son or daughter to end up with a criminal record for experimenting with drugs?
With our current policy settings, it's the completely random element, particularly for young people's lives. You can have two groups of young people doing well at school, well connected with their families, positive, happy futures. One of them randomly gets targeted and found and charged with a deemed supply, and their entire future is compromised. The other group doing exactly the same activity, taking the same drugs, just don't get randomly targeted. They go through their life, they're successful, they're happy, and they don't have that disastrous interaction with our criminal justice system. We know that people go on and have productive, happy, fulfilling, contributing adult lives. It's just we randomly destroy the lives of some because of these bizarre policy settings.
What we see out here in Australia, it's very interesting coming back to that type of mentality when in Colorado right now we can use cannabis freely without paranoia of being caught or pulled over and drug tested and arrested at that point.
It's mainly on the edges of town, just letting everyone know as they're coming in or they're going out that this is the presence here and it's still an illegal thing and we're just going to come down on your ass. Of course, they've got quotas to fill.
But certainly from other countries, other places where they have had a more liberal approach than the prohibition approach. Colorado in the state of the United States made it legal in almost most respects anyway, there's a few asterisks, but mostly legal to possess and use cannabis. The early statistics show that the local population usage of cannabis, as Colorado residents, has actually gone down a little bit.
In Colorado, the availability of marijuana on school grounds went down by 5%.
Crime rates are down 13%. Domestic violence rates are down. Alcohol-related deaths are down. Pharmaceutical-related deaths are down. Heroin the list goes on and on.
So the war on drugs is costing a lot of money, a lot of taxpayers' money. What are the benefits if we did legalise it or decriminalise it? What are the economic benefits?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think the savings are enormous, and we are literally talking about $4 billion at least in savings. But then when you look at our industry being, they estimate, and this is the police estimates, and they're probably conservative, that the drug industry, that Australians buy approximately $10 billion worth of drugs every year. I know. $10 billion worth of drugs. That is a conservative estimate across all areas. The hydroponic marijuana industry in Victoria alone is estimated by the police at $1.5 billion. So this is a big money industry. So even if we could only get GST off it, we're talking a good $1 billion back into Treasury.
So working at a farm, it just sounds so normal, like, I work at the local dairy or something. I mean, we would be shocked in Australia when we heard that. So you worked at the medicinal, what's it called?
It's just a medicinal marijuana farm. There are thousands of them. And it's not uncommon, but what's really common is the medicinal marijuana pharmacies in California. So, the pharmacies here, or I guess you'd call them chemists, yes, with the Red Cross sign. In California, they're green crosses. And as long as you're a registered medicinal marijuana card holder that was given to you by a doctor, then you are legally allowed to go buy any of their products.
Like I was growing cannabis in my 2-bedroom apartment. I had my medical licenses to do so, and I'd walk into a dispensary and I'd walk out with like $3,200, man, straight up cash in my pocket. I was like, well, this kind of looks familiar. You know, it's just a retail shop though. So they had to put regulations in place. So from 2008 to 2014, they really wrapped their heads around the regulatory aspect of things on a medical point of view. And then when they came into the legalization in 2012, they spent 2 years to 2014 getting all of the legislative regulations in place. And what had happened was no one was allowed to open a retail shop, a legalized recreational retail shop, without being a dispensary before.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so then all the tax system is set up right. There's, you know, you don't have to go through this learning curve, man. Everything can very easily transition over, and I think that was a pretty good step for Colorado to do that, to control it. And thus far, it's been a great success.
And I think it's really wonderful because in a lot of ways it really helps the state and it really helps the people, and it's really building up their economy in an incredible way.
And this is why we're so excited, is that now we can bring this model to different regions and different countries and say, hey, look, this is really benefiting society here and culture, even in the non-users. They're getting all this indirect economy stimulation as well. You know, people are staying in hotels, people are filling up their gas tanks, people are eating, people are going to the bars, they're going to a baseball game. You know, people are coming in from all over the place. So, you know, all around success, man.
Yeah.
You know, the billions of dollars that we spend on trying to enforce these unenforceable laws is money we could be spending far more productively in health, in education, in housing, in infrastructure.
25% of Colorado has embraced cannabis legalization, and we pulled in $70 million last year in tax revenue. So if the rest of the black market, for example, got online in Colorado, that number might be what, 200? Yeah. 210 million. Now you're starting to talk, man. You know.
Yeah, no. Well, that's a lot of schools. That's a lot of public services.
Yeah. How about this? Because Australia right now, for example, is not embracing cannabis, and there is a thriving black market. Why don't we do this? Why don't we not touch the existing footprint of anything else? Legalize cannabis, regulate it, tax it.
You know, we know that when we put the tax price up on alcohol, we can we can reduce the sales of it. So we could regulate the sale of these drugs. And if we were looking at a 30% tax on that industry, that's a $3 billion.
Yeah.
Now, you know, that is a lot of infrastructure. That is a lot of schools. That is a lot of, you know, fantastic health services.
There seems to be a big disconnect in this country between what Mr. and Mrs. Average are doing, because a lot of people are smoking marijuana, a lot of people now using it, medical cannabis, between what people are doing and the law. What's going on there?
Look, I think the frightening thing is, and I think the major parties, they're always going for 51% of the vote. So if they don't think that 51% of the vote is going to support them, then they're not going to do it, because they're going to lose the election and they're going to lose their jobs. And it generally gets smaller than that, because most members of parliament hold their positions by 4%. So if they think that there's 4 or 5% of the population who will change their vote on this issue, who are strongly prohibitionist, then they're too afraid to act. And I think it needs to be sort of the minority parties and the smaller parties that just have to push it through. I mean, shit, if 30% of the population voted for me, and that's the number who support legalisation of cannabis, we'd have members in every house in Australia.
Law, I think, has been in place for such a long time, and political class sees it as something that really is fundamental. It seems to be just ingrained into the major party politicians anyway for so long that we just have to have this war on drugs, this sort of approach that drugs are bad and the only way to force it, or to force people or to encourage people maybe to not use drugs, is to make it very heavy penalties for it and so on. There's all the rhetoric about cracking down on the suppliers. The reality is it's people who are the users of drugs who are overwhelmingly the people who are bearing the punishment load.
Politicians are now starting to recognise the war on drugs doesn't work. Just a year ago, 29th of April 2014, Prime Minister Tony Abbott said on 3AW radio that the war on drugs is a war that cannot be won and it's a war that can be lost. But nevertheless, we should keep on fighting it. He said those exact words. Now, I agree with the first part. Congratulations to him for saying that. No previous Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition in Australia had ever said that before. But surely, if what we're doing doesn't work and can lose and can't win, then clearly we should be going back to the drawing board and thinking about other options. We've had half a dozen former commissioners of police in Australia and some serving commissioners of police saying that we can't arrest or imprison our way out of this terrible mess that we're in. And it's time that the politicians got their message and started to look at the alternatives.
Look, we are still going in completely the wrong direction. We are completely in, we're not in denial. We recognise that the war on drugs is over. Even our Prime Minister accepts that. But we have not taken the courage to look at a new solution. And we give the rhetoric of harm minimisation, we give the rhetoric of prevention, but we do not put our dollars where our mouths are, nor do we have the courage to actually bite the bullet and change the laws. And I hope that that's something that I can prod to happen, at least in Victorian Parliament, and set that ball rolling nationally.
Obviously people are kind of still voting for this situation, so I don't think it'll change until Australia wakes up to itself and actually starts getting informed, starts understanding that in other places in the world these things aren't an issue, and it's a waste of our time on negative things. Our country's amazing, it could be so much more positive.
And one of these days I'm sure we'll see a campaign that's based on the fact that a lot of people who smoke cannabis feel disenfranchised. They feel that the political system has let them down, that they're still, after all these years, being the target of law enforcement when they should be. Law enforcement's got better things to do.
It's not really protecting us. Our laws in Australia ought to be relevant, they ought to be functional, they ought to be doing something. What is the point in having laws that everybody knows people break? It just makes a bit of a laughing stock of the political and legal system, and I don't think that helps anyone in this country.
I do think that if we want to have advanced drug law reform in the country, well then we need to make sure we're bringing the population along with us. And there is a compelling argument to legalise, regulate and tax cannabis, and we're seeing it happen around the world.
But the big change has to come through legislation. Politicians have to know that it's politically safe for them to move on this issue. They've got to know that, hey, the world is not going to fall apart in terms of their electorate, their supporters walking away from them, not going to vote for you anymore, going to vote for the other person. Well, if politicians know that their voters are supporting progressive change, sensible change around the drug laws, then that's terrific. So whether you're Mr. and Mrs. Average or whoever you might be, communicating your views about it, about changing to the law and liberalising the law and removing some of these ridiculous prohibitionist harms to your local member is a very useful activity. They'll talk to you, write them a letter, they'll write you a letter back, have a meeting, they'll have a meeting with you. Getting across that it's an ordinary concern for ordinary people, I think, would be a very important task.
Writing to your Member of Parliament, seriously, telling them about your drug use, telling them about your life, personalising drug users, that we are not those guys breaking into our cars desperate for heroin, but we're not the people that are stealing to buy drugs. We are the people that like to use alternatives to alcohol or to tobacco as a social tonic, and politicians need to hear that. They need to hear those personal stories that are good stories, that I'm a student, I'm a mum, I'm a lawyer, I'm a politician, And I like smoking cannabis, and I see nothing wrong with it.
There's actually a fantastic new organisation in the United States called Green Flower Media that has a campaign, Coming Out Green, where they've got people who have been very successful professionals or whatnot, people, couples who speaking about using cannabis in the context of the relationship, that kind of thing. People who have been successful in the world, essentially talking about being cannabis users, and it's an incredible set of videos. It's very new. They've just started operating in the last month or so, and I think that kind of essentially coming out is a really important process of destigmatizing cannabis use.
The more people come out and talk about their own drug use, the less stigma there will be. And of course, the less stigma there is, the more people will be prepared to come out.
And I freely admit smoking marijuana and taking other drugs recreationally. I certainly recognise that I don't do that during work hours, and that I do it as responsibly as I can.
Do you smoke weed?
Yes.
So you're coming out here today?
Yeah.
Same thing, because the more of us who do this, the more we realise that it's not those victims in the street that are the drug users. That 99.9% of the drug users are your work colleagues, are the people on the tram in the morning going to work, are the people selling you popcorn at the movies.
You've got to learn the lessons from the immense failure of the war on drugs in the United States and make sure that we start learning those lessons and giving up the war on drugs in Australia. Politicians are now starting to recognise the war on drugs doesn't work.
Should legalise it, regulate it and tax it. And that sets up a relatively safe model that we can ensure that people get the right health warnings and safety warnings, and it ensures that we can protect underage people from accessing it. We can ensure the quality of the product that's on the market, so we're not selling dodgy stuff that people are probably buying in the streets now.
It sounds an easy fix.
It is easy. You just have to do it in the tens and hundreds of thousands. That's the hard part.
There's still a lot of stigma and miseducated people out there, but are they coming around? Yeah. Is the cat out of the bag? Yeah. It's not going back in, man.
It's time for the people to get off their asses. Time to change the minds of the political classes. Time to stop making elections a joke. The people in power need our vote. Join your party, whatever your desire. Change their policy, set them on fire. We got the power, but we have to take it. No half-assed actions, have to fully bake it. Spend the money on education instead. Turn the legal situation on its head. Create jobs, heal the sick. Hemp can make the economy tick. I would change the law if I could. The law is doing more harm than good. Shouldn't go to jail for just having a toke. Lies and corruption, it's all just smoke. Legalize, regulate, tax it. The law is wrong, it's time to act it. Legislation is the only way. Get up, stand up, have to say. Legalize, regulate, tax it. The law is wrong, it's time to act it. Legislation is the only way.